Welcome to Story Comic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 426. I'm your host, Barney Smith of StoryComic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and talented creator of The Dirty, the Filthy, and the Dead, Stephen Barone.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks, Barney.
Yeah, and I gotta say, Stephen, in all the places that all the creators I've interviewed, you have the cleanest looking room in the background. That is amazing.
Well, housekeeping helps with that, so it's good to have a few, the housekeeping help. Yeah, no, as Barney's mentioned, I'm in a hotel room at the moment. Otherwise, usually I'd be filming these in my basement, which is not quite as clean, or a little more packed with memorabilia and junk. I wish my house looked this minimal. Believe me, I'm working on it.
Yeah, you look like an elite comic creator with how minimalistically that room looks.
Right, where all my valuables are in a safe, like behind a vault. One day, maybe.
Right. So you recently had a successful Kickstarter, The Dirty, the Filthy, and the Dead.
Yeah.
And the subtitle is, it's a horror comic with adult humor featuring a deranged cast of characters attending a class reunion, none of them planned. Wow, that's good. That's a good log line, Stephen.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
No, yeah. It is more horror with a little bit of comedy thrown in. The comedy happens a little bit more organically as the interactions happen, between the characters. There's some, dirty, filthy characters that have some inappropriate moments, maybe, and they say some, things that may not be expected, but so that's where maybe some of the humor comes in, along with the main antagonist, this character named Ralph, who MCs the reunion. And as I kind of label him as you see in the campaign, he's kind of one part George Carlin, one part John Wayne Gacy, and so he kind of cuts them up more than one way. Is a class reunion, but they kind of go into it not thinking about it's sort of like they attend it in a sense that the characters of like Lost are kind of on the island, that they're kind of like party goers, that they're just looking for a party but not really thinking about, hey, should this be the time for our class reunion? They're just there for a party, and so they're not really thinking why are we here and should we be here. And so that's when the kind of ball starts rolling, and they're there kind of basically to get their comeuppance.
So what inspired you to create The Dirty, the Filthy, and the Dead?
So it's based on, going back several years, I wrote a flash fiction piece that was published in a journal. And, there was a part of that piece that, kind of stuck with me. And so I decided to expand on that. And I wrote a longer short story that was about 8,000 words, entitled The Dirty, the Filthy, and the Dead. And I was trying to get that published, but because of its word length, the horror magazines and journals that I was trying to get it published into, it was either too long. Some of the feedback I was getting said that there's maybe, they don't like swear words, or it was too violent for their publication. And if you ever try to submit stories into journals, the wait time to get the feedback to see if you've been accepted, declined is a long process. And so I was kind of getting tired of it. And so, it was during COVID, I started getting back into comics. I was watching some YouTube channels that were talking about comics, and, and I moved into a new home, and there's some comic shops nearby. And so I decided to just I got back into comics again, started walking to the comic book shops, checking out new titles. And a lot of them were like more adults titles, horror comics. And I had this story still floating around. And I thought, I still want to do something with it. So why don't I give it a shot and try to turn it into a comic book? And so that's when I contacted some illustrators, or, try to attempt to contact some illustrators, because I can't draw. And so that's when the process of me, trying to nail down an illustrator kind of started up, or the ball started rolling there.
So it says issue 1 on the cover. So
Yeah, so it's going to be a 4-part miniseries. So it's yeah, so I took the story, the short story, and broke it up into 4 parts. And it should be 4 floppies, about 22 pages long each. And if I get issue 2 launched and successful, maybe 3 and 4 are combined into a double issue, just so people don't have to wait. Which be ideal. But we'll have to see. Hopefully, issue 2 is successful and gets funded just like issue 1. But
Okay.
issue 1's definitely going to happen. So that's I'm definitely happy about that.
Right. So, what are some of the main themes that you explore this series then?
So it's kind of like some kind of regret. And what happens is the main antagonist, I guess you'd say, Ralph, he kind of puts on these stage plays in front of the attendees, and the stage plays basically show them what they did in their past, maybe using some of the people that they offended or hurt. And then you kind of see the past and the present blend, and you get to see how they react towards it, or and see what happens to them. And so in that way, it kind of makes it a little bit of an anthology within the main story itself, because the little stage plays are stories within the main story.
Hmm.
But without using, without having to use flashback as a mode.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, because you mentioned earlier that there's some humor to it. So, what role does humor play in a horror comic like yours?
I guess, like as a maybe a comic creator, like I kind of feel like closest to in terms of like mood and sort of like what I'm attracted to is like maybe Daniel Close. So if you ever read any of his stuff, like Ghost World
Hmm.
and um Monica, just any of his stuff, there's kind of like a serious tilt, but while the humor is there, so it's kind of like black humor, dark humor. And I think they're not always happening at the same time. So there might be a serious moment, and then the humor is there to kind of lighten the mood. Yeah, I kind of don't like stories, whether it's horror, action, whatever, where it's just one note, where there's just kind of the same kind of I guess atmosphere happening the whole time. I kind of like to change it up a little bit.
Hmm.
And so that's where the kind of humor and horror kind of happen or combined.
And so that was going to be my next question. How do you think your comic stands out in the horror genre then?
I Well, for one, I think it's kind of more adult. So I think the themes are, more. I guess you have to have lived some life to kind of, I guess, appreciate the storyline to it. I don't think this is kind of a comic book a 14-year-old is going to be able to pick up and say, "Oh yeah, this makes sense to me." This 40-year-old regretting what happened in 20 years ago in his lifetime, and carrying those regrets with him later on in life. Not to say that there aren't parts of the story that they couldn't appreciate, but when I got back into comics, I was looking for more adult-oriented stories. Not to say that I don't like the action hero stuff, but
Hmm.
I mean, like, I'm a big reader of novels. I like a lot of different novels of different kind of like 20th century authors, and so when I went back into novels, I was looking for more stories that have a little more weight to them and
Okay.
more substance. And so I'd like to think this story has a little bit of that.
Can you talk about your decision to render your series in black and white?
Yeah, so one of it is financial, and just because it being my first comic book, I just thought, I just getting an illustrator. Well, I was looking for an illustrator first, and that turned out to be like a long process and much more difficult than I thought it would be. And so that, and knowing that well, if I have to get a colorist as well, that's just going to be more time and then also more money. But also too, just going back to like the old horror comics that are in black and white, a lot of like old movies, and I just like the style of like Charles Burns and Daniel Close with just sort of dark inks and the dark shading. I think just goes well with horror comics or for horror comic.
So what would you say some influences from film or literature or other media that might have shaped your work?
Yeah, I mean, one way I've been kind of pitching this is if you've ever wanted to see like an episode of Seinfeld directed by David Lynch, this is maybe the closest you might ever get.
That's a
So,
good one.
in terms of like the horror and the comedy, or at least the surrealism, and that's maybe one thing too, that even though I this is a horror comic, I think there's more kind of surreal moments than there is kind of violence horror. I mean, there is some violence that happens towards the end, but it's not sort of blood and guts horror that happens, and more like psychological horror.
Mm. Because as you mentioned too, you've done writing before in the past, and this is
Yeah.
like your first foray into comics.
Mhm.
Um, how would you describe? How do you differ your approach in building suspense and tension in a comic format as compared to, say, writing something?
Yeah, that was a little bit like tricky at first. I mean, I've written screenplays in the past. Initially, like I went to school for film, and so I mean, this having a background writing screenplays sort of helped out. And also, that's where the illustrator I work with, he's been great um, to collaborate with. And so just recently, like the newest page we've gotten completed, I had an idea. I kind of switched things up. I was like, I think this will work better in terms, visually. This is what I'd like to do, and I added more panels to the page. And he was like, I like the idea, but I think we need to use less panels because that'll help with the flow. So having the collaboration with the illustrator helps a lot, because he has actually done comics before, so this is like his third or fourth comic. So having his experience to lean on has also helped.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. What have you learned about self-publishing through doing this project?
I guess I'm still learning a lot, like because I guess I'm still trying to learn, I guess, like the promotional part of it, which is big because I've done some things that haven't worked at all and been like thinking that they were going to work. Just so I realized, I think you have to be more straightforward in terms of like what you're gonna give people. Like people want to know exactly what it is, and I put out some promotional, I guess, ads and stuff where it's just kind of showing more imagery, and
Mm-hmm.
where I probably should have actually added more text, because I was afraid that, well, if there's like too much text, then they're not going to want to read it. So it's kind of a balancing of like how much of this and how much of that to add with giving them enough information. Um, and also just asking questions. I've been communicating with a lot of people or comic creators on X and Blue Sky, and so just also asking a lot of questions. But yeah, like the promotional thing's been difficult to like kind of nail down and learn, just because I've never had to really promote anything before. Even doing these interviews, like I feel like I'm comfortable at first, but then like they start, and like then I get like the nerves start up. So it's like, I'm not like great at public speaking, so I'm still kind of getting used to this part of it too.
Right. So this being your first Kickstarter, which was successful, so congratulations on that.
Thanks.
That's a feat unto itself. Um, because you mentioned there's going to be 4 parts. There's four
Yeah.
parts to it, and so what is your plan for? What have you learned from doing this first Kickstarter that you're going to implement in your future Kickstarters?
Well, so with this one, luckily I did get a lot of help from like friends and family. They gave me some like big donations. So I know with the next issue, like I can't just depend on them to give me big donations each time. And so it is more about the promotion and getting my name and the comic out there to people who don't know of it and don't know of me. Once I get this one actually published, I plan on going to a lot of this. Luckily, I live in a city. I'm in Portland, where there's a ton of comic book shops, And so I plan on going to comic book shops and, possibly, doing signings and selling the book there myself, and going to the conventions, at least smaller conventions, and trying to get, maybe a small table and stuff like that. But at least putting my face and the book out there face to face with potential customers.
Hmm.
And realizing that I just can't depend on like friends.
To make this interview evergreen, say somebody's watching this in 3 years from now and they're
Yeah.
seeing this Steve and they're like, oh man, I can't believe I missed this. And now all 4 issues are out. Where am I gonna find these, Steven? That's what the listener's saying. That's like in 4 years from now. Where's someone gonna be able to find the dirty, the filthy, and the dead?
Yeah. Well, hopefully an online storefront. I know like Fund My Comic has ones, I believe, that people can have storefronts on there. And I believe there's other, comic creators that have storefronts that other creators can use. So hopefully an online storefront. I don't know exactly which one, but and also within, at least in the Northwest, hopefully it'll be here in comic book stores in the Northwest. And if I do get other comics out there, hopefully I'll have my own, storefront at some point.
Now, Steven, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where's the best place they could go to?
They can follow me on X or on Blue Sky. And also if they, it says on, in the Kickstarter where they can read some of my free writings, and online journals. One place, if you're curious about like my sense of humor, you can go to Humor Times. I've written a few pieces there for Humor Times. You could type in Humor Times in my name, and my pieces will pop up there.
Well, listen, Steven, we're going to have to get you back on when you have issue 2 coming out then.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Thank you so much, Steven. This is a genuine pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Unlike riding a bike where you don't get on the bike and all of a sudden like you can get on the bike again, you remember how to ride a bike.
Mm-hmm.
It was really bizarre. Like as soon as I was out of the field for like 6 months and I was going through like my old emails, I'm like, I completely forgot what this acronym means. Like I just like completely like all these things. I'm like, oh my god.
There's tons of acronyms. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. Like everybody talking about this alphabet soup when you're in like the disability
totally. I mean,
world. Like,
even still someone will bring one up. I'm like, wait, what is that one? Because it just I don't come across every day. It's like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like a second language.